Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Society for Surgery of the Elementary Track Research Committee webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Waddah Al-Refaie, and I serve as the chair of the SSAT Research Committee. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Debbie Keller and Dr. Young Hong, who will moderate the webinar with our esteemed speakers today. The webinar today is about research, mentorship, and sponsorship. And it will go on until 7 o'clock Eastern time. And this will be hosted by our research committee. As mentioned, the moderators are Dr. Debbie Keller and Dr. Hong, who will introduce our speakers, Dr. Alverdi, Dr. Feldman, Dr. Stain, and last but not least, Dr. King. Please mute your microphones, be mindful of the background noise, position your camera properly for our speakers, and then limit distractions and avoid multitasking. A copy of the webinar recording and the slides will be available and posted on the SSAT website, and please look for an email. And you're welcome to subscribe to the SSAT YouTube channel and listen to the various webinars. I also encourage those of you who are not members to apply to the SSAT and select the membership that suits your level. We're more than happy to have you as members and benefit from the various roster of benefits of memberships of the SSAT. And also don't forget about the SSAT Soundbites. It's a podcast for a series of surgeons that are streaming at various levels. I'll end here and I'll give the virtual floor to my colleagues, Dr. Keller and Dr. Young Hong. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for a very exciting lineup of speakers tonight. My name is Young Hong. I'm Assistant Professor of Surgery at Cooper University Hospital, and it's my honor to present our first speaker, Dr. John Alverti, who's the Professor of Surgery, Executive Vice Chair in the Department of Surgery at University of Chicago. His talk is titled, "What are the Essentials of a Successful Basic Science Research Mentorship?"
Thank you very much, Dr. Hong. Having a little technical difficulty here. Let me get started with my first slide. Hopefully everybody can see that. And I gotta get rid of everybody's picture here so I can actually see what I'm doing. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hong. And I wanna thank, of course, the committee that put this together so quickly, the Society for Surgery of the Alimentary Tract. I'll thank them individually at the end. This is the group that I work with. I'm very fortunate to be able to be surrounded by a number of cores that make it easy to do research in the institution I'm in. In particular, you know, I've been there for more than 25 years and started there, and I'm still there. And I think that it gives you a certain advantage, certainly in terms of carrying out research over the long haul. We are all living through a pandemic, and as you might imagine, there's many lessons we've learned from COVID-19. I think the first of which is that despite all of our technology, we're learning that microbes can still hurt us and even kill us. Infections affect all aspects of our life, our health, our businesses, our patients, our family, our elective surgery schedules, and even the training of our residents. And, you know, some people have mentioned that the COVID-19 pandemic may just be a dress rehearsal for what is to come. As we all know, there are, you know, third, fourth, and fifth waves of this virus. And so we really need to adjust our thinking, you know, and the way we train residents, fellows, and students in the era of pandemics. And I wrote this, this article during the pandemic just because, you know, I thought it would be important to voice some of these ideas because a lot of people were sort of dismayed that their training was interrupted. And I'm still very, very positive about the trainees that we have today, our students, our residents. They're all just so brilliant and so dedicated. And, you know, I come to give this talk on mentorship having spent 25 to 30 years at the same institution at the University of Chicago. I was on the admissions committee for the medical school for 8 years. And I have a daughter who's a resident at a major university doing a surgery subspecialty. So I think I speak with a voice of both experience, and as a parent. And it's important to really understand who are the people we are actually mentoring. Now, remember that medical school is still only 4 years. The amount of medical knowledge needed to be accumulated in this time period today is orders of magnitude increase compared to previous times. I mean, having watched my daughter go through this, my molecular biology book was, razor thin. Hers was a tome. And that needs to be taken into account. What are they learning in those 4 years? The same, not the same amount of information that we had. The percentage of undergrads taking a gap year or completing a post-baccalaureate course prior to medical school now exceeds 50%, well, at least at the University of Chicago. And more medical students are taking time off to do research, up to a year, to be competitive for a surgical residency than ever before. And it's important to keep in mind who are the people we are actually training. They are people who have to learn open surgery, laparoscopic surgery, and robotic surgery for the same procedure across the various idiosyncrasies of individual surgical faculty. They are people who are smarter and will be better trained than we are and who care about their own health, their families, and their patients with unprecedented intensity and dedication. And most interestingly, they are people whose training outcomes in personal life will be digitally tracked and accountable to the public. There are, several startup companies, one's I think called Black Box, in which, they want to put a black box in the operating room that is going to track all movement. It's going to video everything. It's all of this is going to be discoverable. And if you think about pairing that with one's smartphone, people are going to know, the public is going to know whether you had a good night's sleep the night before, what you ordered at the restaurant the night before, whether you had a beer or not. A lot of information is going to be available, and there's a very strong public appetite for this. So then how does one mentor next-gen surgeons? What is the secret sauce? And, I thought about this and I said, a mentor's job is really to inspire trainees to do great things. I read this book recently, I'm sure many of you read it, called Cutting for Stone. The protagonist is a London-trained a surgeon who's working in Ethiopia in a mission hospital. And during his formative years, he asked his mother, who was an obstetrician gynecologist, he said, I'm not sure, should I study medicine? Do I want to be a surgeon? What should I do? And she said, do something beautiful with your life. I mean, how amazing is that line? It just really struck me as, we got to think about things like that. So a good mentor should be a great clinical surgeon, an enthusiastic and productive scholar, a world citizen, thoughtful partner, spouse, compassionate physician, good person. If you're working for this person, none of this counts. So my first tip to you is a mentor should inspire students, residents, and fellows to do great things because, like our children, trainees eventually see us for who we really are. And I wrote this paper, again, just, having my children grown and being in the home alone. And with my wife, just the two of us now. And I said, I wanted to think back on my career, and there's such a thing called sincerity of intent. And I think I came up with this. I think it's novel. I looked it up on Google. I couldn't find it. And really, it struck me that people don't care as much about what you do, but they care more about why you do it. What's your motivation behind that? And they can see that. And I think that's important to recognize that we as role models and mentors need to care about what we do with the right, sort of passion and dedication, and it will inspire people to do great things. Now, Jeff Matthews, who's the chair at the University of Chicago and one of the most inspiring figures in American medicine and surgery, said, in reality, it's not that hard to be a surgeon. However, it is very hard to get to be a surgeon. And similarly, it's not that hard to be a successful academic surgeon in a prestigious medical center, but it's getting harder and harder to get to be an academic surgeon in a prestigious medical center. So I think a mentor's job is to create radical thinkers who are fearless and unembarrassed when it comes to studying complex surgical problems. And that is because there's still a lot of problems out there. Our patients still develop recurrences after curative cancer resections. They still get infections. They still get anastomotic leaks. There's a lot of problems to solve out there, and it's our job to inspire the next generation to take care of these problems. And it doesn't have to be, a molecular level line of inquiry. There's a lot of opportunity to do research beyond basic science. I think the next tip is to create a collaboratorium, a sort of, a much more organized curriculum-based research experience for basic scientists in your department. And that begins by gathering a number of surgeon scientists who mentor these people. So trainees can enter here and exit here and have the right exposure and be inspired to do research in the future. And a great mentor is an engaged facilitator, not a dictator. So tip 3 is be mindful of a trainee's time constraints and personal goals. Performing basic science research should not be a mechanism to obtain a high impact publication or secure a fellowship. It is a time to appreciate the beauty and power of science. And remember, science is a process, not a result. Its best outputs emerge from experiments that are solution agnostic. I show this paper and its date. It was published in 1990 in Science, and of course it was, rejected initially, multiple revisions. The grants that fueled this great body of work were rejected initially, but this group decided to determine whether you could inject RNA into the muscle of a mouse and it would produce the protein that nucleotide sequence encoded. The very protein, and that protein would be functional. And you might think, well, that's not that hard, blah, blah, blah. But your body rejects RNA, any foreign DNA or RNA, because you have RNases, and it recognizes it. And it was really an important discovery 30 years ago. And that study done by physician scientists, they were pediatricians at the University of Wisconsin, really changed gene therapy forever. I can't remember what the time is, 70 days or 75 days from taking the mRNA sequence of the spike protein and actually injecting the mRNA into people's arms, that we actually have a vaccine and that we're all sitting here talking to each other and able to travel now. So my final tip is to provide enthusiasm, time, excitement, engagement, resources, and access to the right people, and then let your trainee fly on her or his own. I want to thank the Society of the Surgical Alimentary Tract for the opportunity to speak to you today, in particular our moderators, Dr. Hong, Dr. Keller, and Dr. Al-Refaie, and my co-presenters, Dr. Feldman, Dr. Valthi, and Dr. King. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that great talk. I'm pleased to present Professor Liane Feldman, who's the Surgeon-in-Chief of McGill University Health System, the Chair of the Department of Surgery at McGill, and the current President of SAGES. And Dr. Feldman's going to speak to us about the role of mentorship to develop surgical leaders.
That's great, Debbie. And I really appreciate your invitation and your co-leader's invitation to talk about, to participate in this great panel this evening. Hope you can see that. So I'm going to be discussing the role of mentorship in developing surgical leaders. So I wanted to start with essentially what does a leader actually do? I think this is a nice definition, I think, from Barbara Bass, obviously a true leader. And if you're interested in these in this topic, I would recommend this Springer Manual on Leadership in Surgery. It's a very nice summary of some of the issues as really pertains to surgery and academic health systems in general. But basically a leader inspires, we heard that was mentorship from Dr. Alverti, but inspires others to work together to achieve a goal, motivates people towards optimal performance, forms meaningful connections between people, and leverages the talents of a diverse workforce. And if you notice this definition, what might be interesting is that there's absolutely no mention of the personality traits that are important to be a leader. We've all had great leaders who are extroverts or introverts. There's no mention of the attributes that are necessary, and there's no mention even of a title that's necessary. And I think the main goal here is that leadership accrues from our social influence, not our labels of authority or power. And there are many, many styles and many paths to effective leadership. There are many, many types of leadership styles and types of people who are successful leaders. But what do they have? What do they have in common? Well, the most important things about leaders, I think, effective leaders are this may be obvious, but they get things done. And how do they get things done? The first thing they do is they prioritize. They ask what needs to be done now, not what I want to do. And they ask what's best for the organization, not necessarily what's best for me. They then go and put that knowledge into action by creating actual action plans with metrics and timelines, assigning whose responsibility for what, communicating the plan, getting the input that's required. And they tend to focus on opportunities and not problems. They also ensure accountability. They run productive meetings. We've all been in a lot of unproductive meetings. They follow up and they keep people on deadline. And very important, leaders think and say we instead of I. As Coach Bear Bryant said, a famous football coach, if anything goes bad, I did it. If anything goes semi-good, then we did it. If anything goes really good, then you did it. That's all it takes to get people to win football games for you. So where do these leadership skills come from? These skills and attributes come from if you're not born as a leader? Well, for most people, I think it starts with mentors, learning from their example, and really being empowered by them to see yourself as a leader, along with mentorship as well, formal training, education, but a lot of it is through observation, seeing what role models for good or for bad do, and experience in getting experience in leadership. A lot of, I think, experience in leadership comes through our opportunities in specialty societies like this one. And that was certainly true for me. And then bringing back what you learn through those specialty societies back to your home institution. Now, I mean, this might be obvious, but I think most people don't go into surgery dreaming of becoming a division chief or a section chief or a chair or a, God forbid, a dean. We went into surgery to use the skills that we've trained on for many, many years to help people, and that's very satisfying. But the truth is obviously that all surgeons are leaders in clinical spaces, in the OR and the clinics, and we're seen as leaders by others in the organization. And obviously the opportunities to lead are everywhere, regardless of whatever title we have. I think what's really important is that we shouldn't give up our power to change things for the better, because really, if not us, then who? I know others will discuss this in more detail. I'm looking forward to that, but we clearly need diversity in leadership. A diversity that includes and harnesses all of our talents. We have, at least in general surgery, we have 50% women residents now, but our academic chairs are now 12% women in North America. And of course, it's amazing to add Dr. K. Marie King's picture here and have her be part of this webinar tonight. I'm looking forward to her presentation. So I think it's a question of how do we change the status quo in surgical leadership. And there are three areas I think have been noted to be very important there are three areas that I think that are very important, and they are kind of linked together into leadership roles. And I'm going to focus on the mentorship one, but I wanted to mention other aspects as well. So first is the role of mentors. And we're going to touch on some of the roles that mentors play. But I think a really important one is to build a leadership identity in women and underrepresented in medicine surgeons in general. Helping people, first of all, recognize themselves as leaders when a trusted mentor or leader that you respect tells you that you have leadership potential. That's extremely powerful and also helps informally develop those skills. Increasing equity in the leadership of societies and in opportunities to be involved in scientific programming is where many of us gained leadership experience, networking and exposure. And that's very critical in developing leaders, surgical leaders. And finally, the evolving leaders are key. Surgical leaders are key in evolving the culture of surgery to encourage flexibility, accommodation, and support for all surgeons, not just women, to meet their responsibilities and their interests outside of work. And that's not unique to surgery, and it's certainly something which we've seen become probably an issue that's been talked about a lot in COVID and the changing in the culture of work. But we have this culture of workism, not unique to surgery, but that needs to change. And the crisis of burnout and attrition certainly suggests that needs to be changed, and the role of leaders in doing that. So mentors who mentor leaders, I think, start by being talent scouts. I think they're very important in building this leadership identity, reaching out to young surgeons with some aptitude for leadership to make sure that you as a mentor sees them as a leader. When I was a senior resident, my chair at the time, Dr. Jonathan Meekins, very formal kind of guy, I'm not the most formal type of person, called me into his office for a meeting, and he asked me, whose job do I want? And of course, at that time, I thought that was a pretty funny question. But it turns out that it was his job that I wanted, but it took about 30 years to get there. New leaders need to be in the room. They need to be in the room where it happens. And so mentors for leaders include and invite their mentees to be in the room. They give them opportunities to lead. They actually defer in public, I think, to their mentee for specific domains of expertise, which helps other people see them as credible as well. They advocate for them and they protect them. And that's something that you don't know necessarily as a mentee that your mentor is doing. And of course, if they have the capacity to do so and the access to resources, they support formal leadership development courses and activities for their mentees. Effective mentoring, of course, involves being a good leadership role model. If it doesn't look like fun and it doesn't look joyful, then of course nobody will be inspired to want to do that. The rewards of leadership are really seeing the results of your plans in action and seeing pride in the accomplishment of your mentees. And a mentor should never, ever, ever take credit, like Bear Bryant said. Mentors for leaders are excited about their own learning and their own growth opportunities in being challenged with new opportunities. They have a positive energy and a forward-looking optimism. And I think it's very important that they have a healthy approach and model a healthy approach to well-being, both in their professional and personal lives. Mentors also have a sponsorship role. A sponsor is a little bit different than a mentor. It's a person with influence who sees your worth and trusts you. You may not even know who they are. They really work behind the scenes, but they're the people who suggest you for challenging assignments and opportunities. They expose you to other people who can give you those opportunities, and they protect you. And very important is that they promote mentees for positions on committees and task forces, specialty society boards, speaking opportunities. And you may not even know that they're the one that gave up, let's say, an invitation for them to speak to enable you to have that opportunity. I think surgical societies like this one play a really critical role in developing leaders. The opportunity to participate in a task force or a committee provides important leadership and networking opportunities. Mentors help their mentees get involved in high-profile projects, especially if there's a deliverable that the mentee can own as their own project and what they've contributed uniquely to the organization. This clearly helps mentees acquire leadership experience in developing a vision, executing a plan, and getting other people on board. The annual meeting is very important opportunity as well to present research to a like-minded, generally very small community of people that have the same interests as you do. It allows you to build your visibility and also to have fun, network, and have social opportunities to meet people who are like you. Opportunities to apply for research grants that are smaller grants that may lead to bigger opportunities, and of course the speaking and moderating opportunities. But I would like to mention that speaking, specialty societies have to be very deliberate about who gets these opportunities in order to promote diversity and inclusion. This is just a small example of a study that one of my mentees, who's a STAR surgical resident with us, Teodora Dimitra, did at a specialty society that we're involved in, which is about opportunities to speak. And simply by adding a female chair to the to convene a panel or a session increases the likelihood very significantly that you will have female speakers invited. So I think there are very deliberate practices that that really help organizations give opportunities for leadership to everybody. So as I was thinking of this, I tried to think of a catchy way for people to remember some of the, maybe some of the thoughts that I'm leaving you with. So I thought of the 6 I's of mentoring leaders. So a mentoring leader inspires, models the rewards of leadership, identifies people, so scouts and recruits new leaders, includes all the opportunities to leverage talents of our diverse workforce, involves people by advocating and promoting their mentees for leadership opportunities, helps to provide instruction and opportunities for instruction through formal and informal leadership training opportunities, and I think innovates through developing a culture that supports all surgeons to thrive in their professional lives. So thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel this evening.
Well, thank you, Dr. Feldman, for such an insightful talk. That was really thoughtful. And I wanted to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Stephen Stain. He was a long tenure chair of surgery at the Albany Medical College and has recently transitioned his chair of surgery at Leahy Hospital Medical Center. And we're excited to hear his talk titled, Teaching Them How to Fish, the Legacy of Clinical Mentorship. Dr. Stain.
Let me see one more thing. Is that better? Can you see everything?
Switch it back to the other view. The first way was perfect.
I gotta go back. Oh, it's over here. I got it.
Yep. Perfect.
That's better?
Yep, perfect.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much for this kind invitation to speak. And as I thought about the title that was assigned to me, Teaching Them How to Fish, the legacy of clinical mentorship, I actually wasn't sure what to talk about. What I decided to do was probably to make this a little bit more personal than most of the presentations, which are very erudite, and I was going to tell you some personal stories. So I'll talk about clinical mentorship, and I think that what many junior faculty and residents don't realize is that the legacy, the residents and junior people you develop are really the legacy of the faculty. I've always believed, as a department of surgery, we do operations, we write papers, but the thing we do that's most important is train surgeons. It really is the essence of a department. I think the measure of how good our training programs are. And I think what makes most of us the most proud is what our trainees have done. And as I was reflecting upon this in the last month and a half, I've had 3 former residents, and one is named Corinne Chambers, who's in Texas, and I got asked to write her a promotion letter for associate professor. She's a clerkship director. One is Assam Kolilat, who is a vascular surgeon, who's a program director in New Jersey, and he wrote a book with the Young Fellows Association for the college, and I got asked to write the foreword And the last is Ali Salim, who's the professor at Harvard and chief of trauma critical care at Brigham. And I was able to talk on the college webinar about his getting an endowed professorship. So I think that when we who I guess we're senior faculty think about what we're most proud of, it's the residents and junior faculty that we help develop. I think for many of us, where we trained in our residency really in some ways defines, who we are clinically. I feel very fortunate, and I'll talk a little bit about where I train, but I consider it the foundation of our education. It is often the place that sets you up for where your fellowship is, where you're likely to get your first job. And sometimes people call me back as they think about job changes and career advancement. So the parts of your residency, I think, are, research, which you've heard about. I think we sometimes underestimate how important it is to be a good technical surgeon. I think sometimes we take it for granted. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but most importantly, decision-making about when to operate and how to take care of patients after you've operated upon them. So I'm going to go back in time. I gave a talk about, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years ago at Yale, where Harvey Cushing, who's a Yale graduate, has his library, and it made me think about William Stewart Halstead. So many of you know about Halstead. He was famous for a lot of things, a lot of operations, but he was most famous for introducing the system we have of residency training that over several years led to the training of young surgeons. And we still would like to think that our residencies are based in science, anatomy, bacteriology, physiology. And a quote from this is quoted in Cameron's article in Annals of 97, but it's the Bulletin of Johns Hopkins where he actually wrote this, said, "We need a system, and we shall surely have it, that will produce surgeons of the highest type, men and women," those are my words, "who will stimulate the youth of our country to study surgery and devote their energies and their lives to raising the standard of surgical science." The focus on the resident, not the professor, and the aim was to train teachers. So in Halstead's time, he only had 17 chief residents, but these became the professors and the chairs of most of the most prestigious medical schools in the country, and 2 of them went to Cincinnati. It's been said that virtually all surgeons can trace their training back to Halstead and the Johns Hopkins Hospital. So I traced my training. That's where I trained LA County, and that my chair with Arthur Donovan, that is, for those who are old enough, that was the picture used for the soap opera General Hospital. That was LA County General Hospital. So Dr. Donovan, just to give you a sense, my son's middle name is Arthur. And Harvard didn't graduate from Harvard because he went to join the military, trained at Tufts, residency at Yale. His first job at Boston City Hospital, Gardner Child was his chief and Basil Pruitt was his intern. Just give you a sense of what he spanned. He started at USC in LA in private practice in '61, was chair at University of South Alabama, and was chair at University of South California for 11 years. Gustavlinskoff was his chair, Gardner Child, Basil Pruitt, and he became friends with Leslie Bloomgard, who was very important in my life, and Claude Organ. He was the chair of the American Board of Surgery. So here's my tree. Mount Reed and George Hoyer were 2 of Halstead's 17 chief residents. George Hoyer at Cornell trained Gardner Child. Gardner Child trained Art Donovan. There I am here at the bottom. Halstead spent time at the Coker Clinic under Theodore Coker which is in Salzburg and Bern. And I also trained under Leslie Bloomgard. So that's my sort of family tree. Mentors give you advice. Sponsor to those who advocate, and I guess I think that for my career, I've been very, very fortunate to have people who have advocated for me, and now at times I get the opportunity to advocate for others, which is probably the most gratifying part of what I do right now. Liane had a saying I was going to use, wanting to be in the room where it happened. And I've been fortunate that I've gotten older and I've gotten into different organizations to be in the room where it happened for lots of things. And for many opportunities, there's a phone call that happens that you may never know happens. It may not be your chair, it may not be your program director, it may be just somebody who knew you as a resident. And often, when I get a call about someone they're looking at for a fellowship or for a job or a committee assignment, the first question is, are there clinical skills? And for many of the people who call, they're longtime friends who you can't lie to. And you almost don't even have to answer, you said, how is she or how is he clinically? And the pause before they answer, and then start giving, the things that they may also be good at, is all it takes. So my advice to you as we teach you to fish is to make sure as you prepare for what's in front of you in the future, whether it's fellowships, jobs, changing jobs, just remember your clinical abilities are really, really important. And you never know who's going to be in the room when somebody makes a call about you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a great talk, Dr. Stain. Well, as you and Dr. Feldman both alluded to, I have the privilege of introducing Dr. King. Dr. King is currently the Chief of Surgery at Morehouse and has been appointed Chair of Surgery at Albany Medical College. And we are thrilled to have her speak to us tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keller, and thank you to the SSAT Research Committee for inviting me to share my thoughts with you. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but would like to speak directly first to the role of faculty and then the role of residents in bridging the equity gap in research. The data has been shown that there are not enough people either in the pipeline, retained, and this is specific to people of color and underrepresented minorities in medicine and therefore surgery. So for the people in the pipeline and for people who are actively engaged in training or as faculty, it's critical that we offer an environment for success. And what does that mean? For me, I do really believe that when you create an environment where someone feels like they belong, that they will succeed, and all people can succeed in such an environment. And that means really stepping outside beyond a narrow focus that you may be comfortable with, recruiting from the same school that you went to, people in the Northeast that you might be familiar with culturally, or a gender. And it means that you have to broaden that scope to see people who you might not see based on your life experiences. And so one of the first elements of changing and improving equity is opening your eyes to see others who don't look like you, sound like you, speak like you, talk like you, or grew up culturally like you. And in doing so, you might see a bright star that can be cultivated and that can be nurtured and that you could develop into a very successful researcher. And I can speak personally that my research experiences started in college because I had college professors who knew I wanted to go to medical school and encouraged me to look at grants, NIH grants that would sponsor research for me during the summertime. And I spent my first research experience as Thomas Jefferson, doing research on osteogenesis imperfecta. It taught me how to be in a lab. It taught me basic science. And I was able to get my first publication from that experience. Going through my medical school, I had an interested cardiologist who took an interest in me, who also exposed me to research. And then during my residency was in the lab with Dr. David Geller, looking at nitric oxide and the impact of nitric oxide on a rat transplantation, liver transplantation model. And in my fellowship years, I had Michael Saar, then the program director of my fellowship at Mayo Clinic, and Gloria Peterson, the SPORE leader, who helped me launch a K-12 project in looking at genetic risk factor in pancreatic cancer. What all of those mentors and sponsors had in common with how they looked at me was they didn't just see me as a mentee, they saw me as an individual, and they understood my goals and what I wanted to succeed. And sometimes they helped me to think through a path that I wanted to take, to make a recommendation for another path that they thought I would be successful in. And so for faculty, I have 3 C's. I'm following Dr. Feldman. She had the I's, but 3 C's. And one of the first things I want to say is, first, you have to communicate. You have to communicate what it is that your research is. And this will help to inspire people to aspire to be who you are, using Dr. Alberti's word. So what does the communication mean? It means first, trying to attract medical students to do and have an interest in research. Many organizations like ours have a surgical society for medical students, and speaking to them and showcasing your research. I wanted to be a surgeon because a surgeon came and showed me a presentation of their work as a PGY2. So communicating as a medical student, a second-year medical student. So communicating your work, your interests, what you're passionate about early in the pipeline. And if you could do that with residents, medical students, and even high school students in your local area. Many of us have community outreach programs that we could share our research projects with and inspire people to come and do research projects with you. And especially if you're in an inner city, outreach like this can be helpful to stimulate a young mind to choose the path of research. The second thing I want to say is to connect individuals together. And so while they may be inspired by your basic science lecture or your clinical translational lecture or your clinical outcomes lecture, they may not necessarily want to do that type of research. And sometimes I see that when someone is inspired, they'll go and speak to this individual and they may feel deflated after because you don't want to do what they're doing, the work that they're doing. So the connect piece is to connect them with others who might share their interest and who might have ideas on how a project they are deciding can work. I just visited University of Michigan on behalf of SBAS for a site visit and heard from Dr. Cohen, a wonderful program where they are leading innovation with medical students. Medical students are participating in learning on how to innovate, how the business side of innovation. It's almost like an MBA program. And then they develop their ideas and develop and learn about patents and obtain patents and present their research. And these are with medical students. Sometimes I think we forget how intelligent and passionate and inspired medical students are, and we don't necessarily tap that as a resource for research. And so including our medical student is important. I always encourage our residents that if you're starting a project, partner with a student who's interested in surgery. They can do some element of the work that allows them to get on that manuscript and see their work with pride, as Dr. Feldman said. So bridging that gap means seeing all of who is in front of you, whether it's a woman, an underrepresented minority, a male, an individual who didn't come from academia, but is interested in being in academics. Cut those barriers or drop those barriers in order to see the talent that might be there for you. And my last C is commit. You have to then commit to their success. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean giving them assignment and having them go out there, just go write the IRB. No, it will take some time for you to introduce them to the steps of performing research. How do you write an IRB successfully? How do you write a manuscript? What are the elements of a manuscript? How do you edit your manuscript? How do you have the tough conversations about who is in what position in the authorship? That should be held at the very first meeting about expectations on authorship. What do you do to submit a manuscript? How do you physically do that? How do you respond to editors? I had that level of commitment from Mike Sarr. Many of you who know him, he would edit with the red ink. By the time I got my manuscript back, it was a whole different product. But that taught me directly how to write and how to write in a scientific way. And so your commitment to this individual is much like you would commit to your pet or a child, and you have your commitment to them in seeing their success all the way through is critical. And if they fall off the wagon, if they don't have time from a residency standpoint, be creative in how to, how you can support them. Maybe they need students to help them. Maybe they need another resident to help them and help them get to the end goal, which is to present their work with pride at a meeting such as SSAT. I do want to also discuss that I think the role in bridging the equity gap is understanding some of the barriers that your mentee may have faced in the past or currently face, and not have the same expectations that you yourself had going through the process. They may have other barriers. They may have family barriers at home with children, or they may have barriers where they're caretakers. They may have barriers where they've not had the foundational instruction that you expect them to have. And so that you have to help them navigate that. And clearly speaking openly about that, I think will be welcomed to understand potentially as a line item in the questions of getting to know this potential future researcher, is understanding what barriers they may have that you can help them to navigate, because ultimately you want them to be successful. Finally, understanding those barriers and speaking openly is so critical. I remember when I was being recruited to Mayo Clinic, this is Rochester, Minnesota, and Mike Sarr said, I know as a Black woman, you're going to want to find a place to do your hair. And that might seem simple, but it's a big deal to a Black woman to be able to have some place to get your hair done. And Rochester wasn't it. I had to travel to Minneapolis to get my hair done. It's those little things that made me attracted to go there in the first place, because he was thinking about things that may be important to me that others may have missed. So with your research mentees and bridging that gap, it's really critical for you to understand what some of their needs may be and some of their barriers may be in order to be successful. And then for the residents, what I have is first, show interest. Show interest in doing research and finding a path that seems right for you. I shared that I started with basic science. I knew that wasn't the path for me. While I learned a lot, I learned how to publish, I learned how to do this research. I didn't want to operate on animals. I didn't like and enjoy basic science. It just wasn't my passion. And I found my passion in translation and clinical research. And so you may go through such a journey where the first thing isn't the right thing for you. And it's important that you understand yourself as an individual so that you can understand what's right for you, and then being honest with your mentors about the fact that this isn't the right path for me. Largely, they'll be supportive in helping you to navigate your next step and helping you to be successful. So show interest, go to your meetings, hear about the research, look on the website, see who's doing what research, and reach out to them. Many faculty will be very open to having a discussion with you about engaging in research. The next thing I say is show up. So first it requires interest, then you have to show up. And what does that look like? For me, anytime anyone comes to do a project or do research, the first thing I ask is send me your CV. Half the time they won't, and I will determine how interested they are just in that simple request. And then I work with them on their CV to develop their CV. And then we work to develop a plan for them, whether it's a project or it's setting up a research idea that another faculty will work with them on. But it requires you showing up, coming to the meeting on time, having an agenda when you come to the meeting, you guiding the discussions in the meeting and being clear about what your needs are from that faculty member. And finally, show out. When it's time for you to present, be well prepared, dress well, practice, 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 practice. We would practice all of our presentations before presenting at a national meeting with our local group. And that means you're going to have people editing your slides. Don't take it personally. Feedback is great for development. And so show up, practice, and be proud of yourself when you do this research. So I want to keep us on time and ensure that we have time for questions, but really to build that equity, it's really looking beyond ourselves for the talent that exists in front of us and inspiring those talented people to really do what we do and enjoy so much. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to my colleagues who allowed me to share this space with them.
We'll open the chat up to questions for our speakers. I'm going to start while we're waiting for the questions to come in. I have a question first for Dr. Alberti. It's hard to get funding in any discipline. It's especially hard for young surgeons and trainees to get funding for basic science. As a mentor, what do you say to get them through it and to keep going?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think, on mentorship, they really have to be in the right environment and with the right people. And, I'm inspired by listening to Dr. Feldman and Dr. King, and Dr. Stain particularly about this, because really when you boil down all their lectures, it's about time. How much time do you actually spend? And I think Dr. King spent a lot of time on this idea of meeting with people, talking to them, engaging with them. And, many people, for example, will say, well, write your grant and send me your Ames page, or, when you get the 12 pages done, bring it to me, or do your K award. And it's not the same as sitting down. I mean, I can remember back 20 some years when I sat down with a National Academy member, and we literally drank coffee for 3 hours in a coffee shop in Hyde Park, in a Middle Eastern, it was actually a Middle Eastern restaurant, brought the little tea on the thing. It was fantastic. 3 hours. This person gave me his time and attention. And I think that's what we're all saying. That's what it's about. So if grants, they're like, good wine. You never serve them before their time. And they really require all the right grapes and all the right dirt and all that time and energy and love and all that other stuff. And I think that's where the problem comes in. I'm the chair of the studies section I'm on now, and I see grants. I'm like, Nobody helped this person. They just thought they had a good idea. They could write it on their own, and nobody helped them, and then you can see the ones that they were really coached well. And it's not about he or she's a brilliant researcher as much as it's about they spent a lot of time with them. So I would suggest to anybody, find somebody you know is an inspiring mentor and a role model, and engage them to spend time with you. And if they can't, look elsewhere.
May I add to that, Dr. Keller? This idea
Please.
of time that Dr. Alverti is sharing is so important. A colleague was sharing a statement that professionals such as athletes have coaches that they work with all the time. And sometimes we don't think that we also need that coaching. So residents going up to make a presentation needs and requires a lot of coaching. They have never done it before. They need to know how to create their slide deck. They need to know how to speak and what to spend time on. So this time element, is so critical that if you really want the success of an individual, you really do have to invest time in them.
So we have a question for Dr. Stain. What is the biggest mistake mentees make that prevent them from developing their full potential?
I think often I see trainees that mistake somebody being hard on them is that the person is being difficult. I think that, and I tell this to some of my residents, that if I start ignoring you, it's worse. It means you're not worth my effort. Some of the best lessons I've learned, both clinically and in research, were people who, at the time, I thought was very hard on me. I mean, I remember when I worked with Bloomgart, the papers would come back covered in red. I can't write anything. Or, in my chief resident year doing a gastrectomy, every stitch was wrong. And I think at the time, I didn't appreciate that those were people who were investing time in me. And I think that's the mistake lots of trainees make. Just because people are hard on you, it's because they think you're worth the effort.
I have a question for Dr. Feldman. So in your talk, you sought out leadership aptitude. So what are some traits that you see in potential leaders? And in the same light, what are some pitfalls in potential candidates that you thought was a leadership potential, but had some mistakes along the way?
I don't think you're right that I don't think there's one type of person that has the aptitude to be a leader. But I think it's a lot about how that person carries themselves when you see them, how they interact with other people, how they commit to things, the way they may interact with you. I like somebody to stand up to me. If I'm in a research meeting and we're having, it's a group conversation and you're kind of like blah, blah, blah. I want the person to be like, okay, that's gone too far. Or, okay, well, I don't think that's going to work. I think a person, I want to hear, and that can be tricky though. And I understand that can be tricky. Not everybody, can do that in a room, but maybe through an email, through a private conversation. But I want to hear that person's unique perspective on things somehow. I need to hear it somehow. It needs to come through to me. Then then that's the connection that you make. So I think there's lots of different ways. I like someone who challenges me personally.
Any of the panelists have questions for each other?
One of my favorite stories was this graduate student who told me that he gave his manuscript to his mentor and he circled the entire methods area and he goes, rewrite this, but this time in English. He knew right then, he didn't please his mentor. And maybe that's what Steve was talking about. Don't be discouraged because he really wanted to see it again, even though it's seemingly insulting.
I have a question for Dr. Feldman and Dr. King. For females coming to you that are looking to go into leadership, do you have any particular advice to them to just progress without the microaggressions of being told that they're too forward or pushy or emotional for being passionate?
Maybe Kay Marie, do you want to start?
I think you really can't enter into leadership as a man or woman without being very resilient. And resilience to me does not mean that you won't go through crises. It means that after the crises, you're going to grow and evolve. And so it's really important for them to understand that they face a different set of hurdles. And I try to get the men and the women to understand what those hurdles are so that men can be allies for women when they observe something that is a microaggression. But you need a thick skin, and you need a lot of peer support, and you need a lot of mentorship and sponsorship. And without that, I think it's very hard. You cannot do it alone.
Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I think a lot of it is that you need to tell your story. That you need someone to listen, and I think that kind of helps when you. It becomes a story that it disarms it in a way. If you have a group of people, friends, other surgeons who understand what you've gone through, and then it kind of becomes more of, a story we tell outside of needing the allies. I mean, just between us as people. Sometimes when bad things happen, just having, people to talk to about it is, I have always found helpful.
I'm going to expand on that a little bit with a question from someone who said that as a young female academic surgeon, I often find myself struggling to get opportunities to present at grand rounds, national meetings, conduct research, and get funding. And they know they're not alone. They've been bounced around between senior surgeons without ever really having a mentor or a sponsor. And 8 years into practice, they still haven't found one. Any advice?
I think you have to be open to approaching leaders. And I'll give an example in the SSAT. Dr. Jeff Matthews was president. And I was crossing the street with him. And I said to him, hey, I have an idea about improving diversity and inclusion in the society. And I would love to talk to you about this idea. And to his credit, he was so open. And we sat there in that very moment and planned the diversity and inclusion task force. But I went to him and he was open. And I say to people that it's so important for you to get out of your shell. Even I'm an extrovert, but even if you are an introvert, I challenge myself every meeting to meet 5 new people every day. Just go and meet 5 new people. They may not remember you after you've met them, but you've met them and you've made a connection, and perhaps that connection can get deeper. And so if you're waiting for it to happen to you, it usually doesn't. And so it may mean raising your hand and volunteering that I want to be a grand round speaker, and here's my topic, and can you vet it with me? So you have to be a bit more forward than you think you would have to be because people are so busy in their lives that they may not have the opportunity or time to single you out and offer mentorship to you. There was a
question from confidential that LK read, and I guess the person has bounced around between surgeons for 8 years and not found a mentor. And, you know, I would just offer LK to send them my email. You can just email me. I'd be happy to sit and talk to you. It's something which, for those of us who do this class, it's easy to do. It's something, you know, I don't know what city you're in, but I may know someone who could help you. So I think that, you know, I have been personally blessed by people much senior to me who reached down and pulled me up. And I think it's you know, some of those people, Courtney Townsend, Fabrizio Michelozzi, and I just think, you know, I don't know if I can help you, but it'll, you know, I'm happy to spend an hour on the phone with you. So you can look me up at the Lay website, or LK can send you my email, and I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you. The question from Dr. Lowry, asking if there's advice for mentees about ending a mentorship relationship that's not working.
Yeah, that's tough advice, and obviously there's some politics in there. You certainly don't want to offend anybody, but I mean it sincerely that, you know, people always ask me about collaborators. How do you get these collaborators and this, that, and the other? I go, you can't, you know, you can't take your samples and drop them off to a molecular biologist and say, can you run these for me? And by the way, do the data display and the biostatistics and, you know, get me a p-value. That never works. And it's kind of like dating in a way. You know, you can't make a person like you. You can say, oh, I really like you, you know, you're this, that, and the other. They have to like you back. And so it's about engagement. It's about, you know, I think everybody touched about this on, it's about time. And so if this person is not a good mentor, you know, you need to just be frank with them and say, you know, I have, you know, that's why I use that word sincerity of intent. I really want to be NIH funded in 5 years, or I really want to be, you know, a regionally recognized, you know, pancreatic surgeon. And I need this. And you know, I'm sorry it didn't work out. Like a breakup, I suppose, you know. I'm sorry this didn't work out, but I really need to get this for myself. I hope you understand. And, you know, otherwise, you know, it's always about honesty and time and just being transparent up front. I think that's probably the best advice.
We've already gone a little bit over our time, so I just want to thank all of the panelists for joining us, all of the attendees for coming on. We will have this live online taped, sorry, not live, fake live. And any other questions, you can email LK and we'll try to get answers back to you. Thank you all so much.